At my parents' house, there were always two sets of rules. One for Madison, the shining future of the family, and one for me, the disposable kid. I realized it when I was 15, when my dad left an envelope on the kitchen table before breakfast. "Here's your share of this month's bills," he said without even looking up from his newspaper. Madison was making waffles, laughing as she talked about a party at someone's house. She was 17 at the time, I was 15. And in that moment, the division between our worlds became very real. On the same day I started paying bills, my parents bought her a MacBook Pro, essential for her studies. I got a job at the local grocery store after school. While Madison came home in her new Honda Civic, a birthday gift from my parents, I walked 40 minutes in the rain or shine. She slept in on weekends. I got up at 5 for morning shifts. "It's good to learn the value of work early," my dad always said when I questioned the unfairness. My mom would just add, "Madison needs to focus on college. Her future is bright." Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. And what about me? Well, apparently I wasn't even worth a word. My room was a cramped cubicle at the back of the house. Madison's room had a bathroom, a balcony, and had been renovated 3 times in 4 years. Every penny I earned went toward the rent my parents charged, thrift shop clothes, and savings for a future where I wouldn't have to swallow that daily injustice. Only my grandpa Henry seemed to notice I existed. When he visited, he always asked about me first, ignoring Madison's constant interruptions and my parents' efforts to steer the conversation toward her achievements. "How's work going, kid?" he'd ask, his piercing blue eyes meeting mine. Henry had been living alone on a farm in Oregon ever since my grandma passed away. A magical place with acres of forest, a clear creek, and a red barn that looked like it belonged on a postcard. I spent a few summers there when I was younger, before my parents decided that working was more character building for me than taking vacations. "You've got a head for business," Henry told me once, as we watched the sunset from the porch. "Not the way your dad thinks, but in the right way. You see value where others don't." Maybe that's why dinner that Thursday night changed everything. Henry came to visit us. Something rare since he avoided my parents' house as much as I wished I could. My mom had made her famous roast, a treat reserved only for special occasions or when Madison brought home important friends. "We're worried about you, Dad," my mom began, as soon as we finished dessert. "That farm is too much work for a man your age," my dad continued as if he had rehearsed it. "Madison is getting into one of the best business schools in the country. The tuition is astronomical." Henry frowned while Madison smiled, pretending to be modest. "We're thinking it might be time to sell the farm," my dad finally revealed. "The land is worth a fortune now. It would be an investment in the family's future. The family's future. In other words, Madison's future. The farm isn't for sale," Henry replied simply, taking a sip of his coffee. "Be reasonable," my mom insisted. "What are you going to do with all that space? Madison needs this boost for her bright future." I watched my grandpa's face harden. For the first time, I saw how tired he looked, yet still determined. "And what about your other son?" Henry asked, pointing at me. "He's been working since he was 15, paying to live in his own house, and I've never heard you mention his future." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. "He's following his own path," my dad replied curtly. I don't know what gave me the courage at that moment. Maybe it was the anger that had been building inside me for years. "What you're doing is unfair," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "You never invested a cent in me, but you expect Grandpa to sell the place he loves to fund another one of Madison's whims?" My dad's face turned as red as I'd ever seen it. "How dare you talk like that in my house?" "In the house I helped pay for," I replied. What happened next still hurts to remember. Shouting, accusations, Madison crying theatrically. My dad pointing toward the door, demanding I leave. My mom, for the first time, left speechless. Henry got up calmly, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Grab your things. You're coming with me." I packed the little I had into 2 suitcases. As we left, I heard my dad saying I was no longer welcome there. I looked back one last time at the house where I grew up but never felt at home. In Grandpa's car, driving through the night toward Oregon, I felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. I was only 19, without college, without a plan. Just the courage to stand up for what was right and a grandpa who finally saw me. "You did the right thing back there," Henry said, breaking the silence. "Not because you defended me, but because you finally defended yourself." The road stretched out ahead, taking me away from the past and toward a future that, for the first time, truly felt mine. I quickly adapted to life on Grandpa Henry's farm. Free from the constant weight of being the invisible kid, I discovered an energy I never knew I had. I'd wake up with the sun, help out with the animals and repairs around the property, and for the first time, I felt like my work mattered. Henry didn't just teach me, he listened to my ideas, something that had never happened at my parents' house. "This land has more potential than it seems," Henry commented one morning as we walked through the woods surrounding the property. "Your great-grandpa bought these acres for almost nothing during the Great Depression. People only saw wood and rocks. He saw a legacy. The woods were dense, with old oaks and pines forming a canopy that barely let the sunlight through. The soil was rich, damp, and dark, unlike anything I had ever seen. What do you think we should do with this part of the property?" Henry asked, stopping in a clearing. "It's been untouched for decades." I thought for a moment. "I'm not exactly sure. It feels special, like we should find out what it wants to be instead of forcing something on it." Henry smiled. "Exactly what I'm thinking." That night, while I was browsing the internet on the old wooden table in the kitchen, I stumbled upon an article about special forest products in Oregon. Between wild honey and ornamental ferns, a section on truffles caught my eye. Truffles, those fungi that chefs treat like black gold. Apparently, the soil and climate in western Oregon were perfect for certain varieties. The article mentioned that a single pound of high-quality truffles could fetch hundreds or even thousands of dollars. A farm dedicated to truffles could generate more income per acre than almost any other crop. "Grandpa, have you ever thought about growing truffles here?" I asked at breakfast the next morning, barely able to contain my excitement. Henry raised an eyebrow. "Truffles? Those mushrooms the French go crazy for?" "Exactly. I read that Oregon's soil is perfect for them. And these old woods on the property have just the right conditions. Well-drained soil, plenty of shade, and the right host trees." I explained everything I'd learned from my late-night research. How truffles grow in symbiosis with certain tree roots, how they can be cultivated by inoculating saplings with spores, and how some native Oregon varieties were starting to make a name for themselves in the gourmet market. Henry listened intently, his eyes lighting up even more. "You know, your dad always said you had no ambition, but what he never understood is that ambition doesn't mean chasing what everyone else values. It means finding something you believe in and making it real." In the weeks that followed, I dove into exhaustive research. I studied cultivation techniques, different varieties, and potential markets. I discovered that besides planting host trees inoculated with truffle spores, we might also be able to find native truffles in the oldest parts of the forest. The challenge was locating them, since they grow completely underground. "We need a trained dog or pig to hunt for truffles," I explained to Henry, showing him videos of sniffer animals in action. They can smell ripe truffles even beneath layers of soil and leaves. "And where exactly are we supposed to find a truffle hunting pig in rural Oregon?" Henry laughed. I didn't have the answer yet, but I was determined to figure it out. I put together a detailed business plan, calculating the startup costs, the time until the first yield — truffles take years to develop — and revenue projections. The initial investment wouldn't be small, but the potential rewards were astronomical compared to any traditional crop. Henry went over my plan, asking insightful questions that made me refine the details even more. "This isn't a weekend project," he warned. "It's a commitment for years. Are you ready for that?" "I'm more ready than I've ever been for anything," I replied confidently. The idea of turning something overlooked into something valuable really resonated with me. Maybe because I felt exactly the same way. Henry nodded, satisfied. "Then we need to learn from those who already do it. I've heard of a few truffle farms in the Willamette Valley. Let's go visit them." The first farm we visited turned out to be smaller than I'd imagined. From the outside, it looked like a well-kept grove with orderly rows of oaks and hazelnut trees. Jack Palmer, the owner, was a former college professor who started his truffle business as a scientific experiment and ended up making it his life. "Most people don't get how much patience this business requires," Jack explained as we walked among his trees. "I planted these hazelnut trees 8 years before I harvested my first decent truffle. I watched everything closely. The spacing between the trees, the irrigation system, the soil management techniques." Jack explained how different truffle varieties prefer different host trees and soil conditions. The winter black truffles, the most valuable ones, grew best with oaks and hazelnuts in limestone-rich soils. "Do you have any old, untouched land?" Jack asked. When I confirmed, his eyes lit up. "Then you might not have to wait too long. There might be native truffles out there. Oregon has some excellent varieties that are starting to get noticed in the gourmet market, and with the right marketing, some chefs prefer our local truffles over the imported ones." While we were talking about harvesting techniques, a young woman came over with a chocolate Labrador that seemed incredibly well trained. "This is my daughter, Olivia," Jack introduced her. "And this is Rusty, our best truffle hunter." Olivia had brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, muddy work boots, and a smile that lit up her face when she introduced herself. Unlike the perfectly groomed girls that Madison would bring home, Olivia was completely at ease with dirt under her nails and sweat on her forehead. "I overheard you talking about old woods," she said. "If you have oaks that are 20 years or older, I'd bet you already have truffles growing there. You just don't know where to look." Henry mentioned the grove of century-old oaks in the northern part of the property. Olivia visibly lit up. "That's a treasure waiting to be discovered. You need a good sniffer. Rusty here took 2 years to train properly." "And where do we get one of those?" I asked. "Well, pigs are naturally better than dogs. They have a sharper sense of smell for truffles, but they're stubborn and try to eat anything they find," she explained. "Coincidentally, we have a piglet from our truffle sow. She just had a litter." Jack shot his daughter a warning look. "Olivia, we can't just give one away. The training is complex." "I could teach him," Olivia offered, looking at me, "if you're really committed." Something in the way she said committed sounded like a challenge, and I always loved a challenge. "We're committed," I said, ignoring the amused look Henry gave me. A week later, Olivia showed up at our farm driving a beat-up pickup truck. In the back, in a transport crate, was a small rosy piglet with black spots around her eyes, like she was wearing a little mask. "This one's the best of the litter," Olivia announced proudly. "Her mom is our top truffle sniffer. It runs in the family." The piglet looked at me with curious, smart eyes as I lifted her out of the crate. "What should I call her?" Olivia laughed. "Considering your future work, how about just Truffle?" And so, our journey into the truffle world began. Olivia started coming by regularly to help train Truffle, teaching me techniques to reward proper sniffing behavior without letting her gobble up the precious fungi. At the same time, we planted hundreds of hazelnut and oak saplings inoculated with truffle spores in a part of the woods we had carefully prepared. Olivia's visits became the best part of my day. She brought practical know-how that no book or online video could match. She knew the woods by instinct, pinpointing promising areas just by the surface vegetation and soil composition. "This business demands that you really know your land," she explained as we walked across the property. "Every nook has its own microclimate, its own story. Truffles are just one part of that story." Henry watched our growing, let's call it a professional partnership, with a playful sparkle in his eyes. "That girl has more practical knowledge than any college professor," he commented after one of her visits. "And it seems she especially enjoys sharing that knowledge with you." I brushed off the remark, though I couldn't deny I looked forward to each of Olivia's visits. There was something reassuring about being with someone who valued hard work, the land, and real-life know-how. Things that my parents and Madison had always dismissed as second-rate compared to formal education and corporate careers. After 3 months of intensive training, Truffle was ready for her first real hunt. The piglet, now much bigger, but still full of energy, had learned to signal a truffle's location without immediately trying to dig it up. On a cool fall morning, Olivia arrived with some small, special shovels and collection bags. "Today's the day," she announced. "I can feel it in the air. It's the perfect season for autumn truffles." We headed into the oldest part of the woods, where century-old oaks formed a green cathedral. Truffle was excited, tugging on her leash as her snout went to work, picking up all the scents of the forest. Henry followed us, even though the walk was hard for him. "I wouldn't miss this for anything," he insisted. For nearly an hour, Truffle led us through the woods, occasionally stopping to check something before moving on. I began to worry that this was all for nothing. Then, near the base of an especially imposing oak, Truffle stopped. Her whole body went stiff, her snout twitching as she intensely sniffed a specific spot in the ground. She started gently scratching the ground with her front paw, glancing at me and then back at the soil, just as Olivia had taught her. "That's it," Olivia whispered, as if speaking too loudly might scare the truffles away. "She found something." Using the small shovels, we carefully removed a layer of leaves and began to dig gently. A few inches down, I saw something dark and knobby, about the size of a hazelnut. "It's an Oregon truffle," Olivia confirmed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Leucangium carthusianum. It's not as famous as the European ones, but local chefs are starting to prefer them. It smells strongly of pineapple and butter when it's ripe." I gently lifted the truffle, amazed by its weight and texture. Its aroma was subtle, but distinct, nothing like I had ever smelled before. "How much do you think this is worth?" Henry asked, curious. "This one? Probably about $60 considering its size and quality, Olivia replied. But the real value is in what it represents. If we find another, there's more, I finished, understanding the implication. Over the next few hours, Truffle found 11 more truffles of different sizes. By the end of the day, we had almost a pound of native Oregon truffles picked right from our land. This is just the beginning, Olivia said, as we carefully cleaned our harvest. This forest probably has hundreds more. And once the trees we planted start producing in a few years, they'll yield even more valuable varieties. That night, Henry insisted that Olivia stay for dinner. We made a simple risotto, finishing it off with shavings of the truffles we'd harvested. The flavor was extraordinary, earthy, complex, with those hints of pineapple and butter that Olivia had mentioned. To our new venture, Henry toasted, raising his cup. And to our treasure hunter, I added, looking at Olivia. Her face flushed slightly, but her smile shone brightly. You haven't seen anything yet. This is just the start. The next day, Olivia helped me get in touch with a few restaurants in Portland that her dad was linked with. One chef, especially enthusiastic, agreed to buy our entire initial harvest at a higher price than we expected. Local, fresh truffles are rare, he explained when we delivered the goods personally. Most of what we get is imported, or past its prime. These are perfect. We left the restaurant with a check for nearly $1,000 and a promise that he'd buy everything we could supply in the future. See? Olivia said as we headed back to the farm. And that's just one restaurant. In the months that followed, we established a routine. 3 times a week, Olivia would come help me search for truffles. Meanwhile, we took care of the newly planted saplings and prepped more areas for expansion. Henry supervised, offering advice based on decades of experience with the land, even though truffle farming was new to him as well. With every visit, Olivia and I grew closer. I found out that she had studied mycology at college before deciding she preferred hands-on learning over textbooks. We shared stories about growing up with family expectations, hers to follow the traditional path her dad set out at college, and mine to virtually not exist compared to Madison. Have your parents ever reached out? She asked one afternoon as we rested after a particularly good truffle hunt. No, I replied honestly. I think they're glad to be rid of me. Now they can put all their resources into Madison without having to justify the imbalance. Olivia frowned. That's their problem, not yours. Look at what you've achieved in just a few months. It was true. Our little truffle business was already making steady income only from the native truffles we found. The plans for expansion were moving forward, and I had even begun experimenting with value-added products. Truffle salt, truffle-infused honey, truffle oil, that we could sell at premium prices. Henry seemed to come alive with every little success. I knew this land had potential, he repeated often. It just needed the right eyes to see it. One afternoon, while we were reviewing the numbers from our first official quarter, Henry slid an envelope across the table. What's this? I asked. Documents from my lawyer. I'm transferring the farm to your name. I was speechless, staring at the envelope as if it contained something dangerous. Grandpa, I can't accept that. The farm is your life. It will be for as long as I live, he assured me. But I want it to officially be yours. Think of it as an early investment in my entrepreneurial grandson. I tried to protest, but Henry was stubborn. I've seen enough to know you'll take care of this place with the respect it deserves. Your parents only saw its sale value. Madison would probably turn it into some kind of luxury retreat or something equally ridiculous. Reluctantly, I took the envelope. Thank you for your trust. I promise I'll honor it. Henry smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I know you will. Now, speaking of honoring things, when are you finally going to ask that girl Olivia out on a real date? I'm getting tired of the two of you dancing around each other like shy teenagers. I felt my face heat up. It's not that. We're just business partners. Kid, I may be old, but I'm not blind. She doesn't come here 3 times a week just to see truffle. Maybe Henry was right. The next time Olivia came over, after an especially successful harvest, I gathered some courage. I was thinking, maybe we could go out to dinner in Portland this weekend, to celebrate our success. Olivia's smile lit up her whole face. I thought you'd never ask. The next 2 years were the most productive of my life. Our truffle business grew way beyond our initial expectations. We expanded into more parts of the farm, secured contracts with high-end restaurants all over the Northwest, and our processed products, mainly truffle oil and truffle-infused honey, started showing up in gourmet shops in Portland, Seattle, and even San Francisco. Olivia eventually moved to the farm, bringing her expertise and passion full-time. She wasn't just a business partner, but my partner in every way. Together, we turned what was once a promising idea into a sophisticated operation with a small team of seasonal workers during the busiest harvest times. Henry watched our success with quiet pride. Although he no longer had the strength to join the truffle hunts, he would sit on the porch with Truffle, who had grown considerably but still had her amazing talent, and offer advice built on decades of experience with that land. One peaceful afternoon, I realized that something was wrong. Henry was sitting more slowly than usual, his face a bit paler. When I offered him some tea, he accepted with a weak smile. "I'm just tired today," he assured me. But there was something in his tone that worried me. A week later, I found Henry sorting through papers in his office, something unusual for him, since he always preferred working outdoors instead of dealing with paperwork. "Just organizing some things," he explained vaguely when I asked. I should have pressed him more, asked more questions, but I respected his space just as he had always respected mine. That's one of my few regrets. One Sunday morning, 3 months later, Olivia and I returned from a delivery in Portland and found Henry sitting in his favorite armchair on the porch, with Truffle sleeping at his feet. From a distance, it looked like a perfectly peaceful scene. It wasn't until we got closer that I realized my grandpa had passed away peacefully, watching over the land he loved so much. The funeral was simple, just as Henry would have wished. Neighbors, local friends, and a few clients he'd made close over the years attended. Jack Palmer, Olivia's dad, helped with the arrangements. The most noticeable absence, of course, was my immediate family. I sent a telegram informing them of Henry's passing, but even that wasn't enough to bring them to Oregon. 2 days after the funeral, I got a call from Mr. Hoffman, Henry's lawyer. He asked me to come to his office for the reading of the will and mentioned that my parents and Madison had also been invited. "Did they confirm their attendance?" I asked, surprised. "Yes," the lawyer replied. Very promptly, I might add. The next day, I went into a small law office in Eugene to find my parents and Madison already seated, as if posing for the perfect family photo. My mom wore a sleek, brand-new black outfit. Madison was impeccably dressed and made up, as always. My dad, in his executive suit, couldn't even hide his impatience. "Ah, finally," my dad muttered as I walked in. We hadn't seen each other in over 2 years. Not since that night I got kicked out. No phone calls, no messages, nothing. The only noticeable change was that Madison seemed even more self-assured, if that was possible, probably because she'd always been the center of attention. "Good to see you too," I replied curtly, sitting as far away from them as I could manage. Mr. Hoffman, an elderly man with reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, came in carrying a thin folder. After the initial formalities, he opened the will and began to read. "I, Henry James Wilson, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament." The legal formalities went on for a few minutes. I saw my dad checking his watch discreetly twice. Finally, we got to the important part. "As for my assets, properties, and financial estate, I leave everything. My farm, bank accounts, investments, and personal belongings. Entirely and without restrictions to my grandson." Mr. Hoffman read my full name. There was a moment of total silence, as if someone had sucked the air out of the room. "This is impossible." My dad was the first to react, his face turning red. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake, Mr. Wilson," the lawyer replied calmly. "The will was updated about 18 months ago and is perfectly in order." "And what about us?" my mom asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Hoffman adjusted his glasses. "There are no specific provisions for you in the will. However, there is a letter that Henry asked to be read on this occasion." He took an envelope out of the folder and began to read the letter my grandpa had left. "Michael, Sarah, and Madison, if you're hearing this, it means I have left this world. I regret that our relationships have deteriorated over the years, but I don't regret the decisions I made. When you kicked my grandson out of the house simply for standing up for what was right, you revealed a lot about your values. While you only saw the monetary value of this land, he saw its true potential. While you valued status and appearances, he built something genuine with hard work and vision. The farm was meant for someone who loved it for what it is, not for what it might be worth on the market. My grandson proved to be that person. I hope you find peace and eventually gain the wisdom to understand that true success isn't measured by bank accounts or social status, but by the integrity and relationships we nurture. With love, despite everything, Henry." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of my dad's chair scraping as he abruptly stood up. "We're going to contest this," he declared, looking straight at the lawyer. Clearly, my father wasn't in full control of his mind. He He was manipulated. Mr. Hoffman stayed calm. You have every right to try, of course. But I must tell you, Henry took every precaution. He underwent a complete psychological evaluation before updating the will, had 2 independent witnesses, and he thoroughly documented his reasons. I have video testimonials kept in a safe. If you decide to contest this, those materials will be presented in court. Madison, who had stayed silent until then, finally spoke. How much is the farm worth now? The blunt, tactless question caused Mr. Hoffman to raise his eyebrows. That's not relevant to these proceedings. Millions, I replied calmly. The last comparable piece of land sold in the area was valued at about $5 million. But our truffle operation made almost $1 million just last year. With the new plantings starting to produce, that value should double in the next 2 years. Madison's eyes widened. My dad paled. $1 million last year? My mom repeated in disbelief. And doing what? Growing truffles. You know, those mushrooms the French love, I said, echoing the same words Henry used when I first suggested it. We turned that useless land you wanted to sell for peanuts into one of the most respected truffle businesses in the Northwest. My dad exchanged looks with my mom, quickly calculating the implications. I could see the gears turning in his head, how much money they had lost, and how much they might gain if they managed to contest the will. This isn't over, my dad declared, heading for the door. We're going to talk to our lawyers. Madison hesitated before following our parents, giving me a look I couldn't quite read. Maybe it was envy, maybe regret, or maybe shock at realizing that her invisible brother had built something solid while she was still relying on our parents' money. After they left, Mr. Hoffman gave me a gentle smile. Henry spoke very highly of you. He was extremely proud of what you two built together. Thank you, I replied, feeling the weight of Henry's absence even more strongly at that moment. You need to be prepared, he warned. They will probably try to contest this, even though they have little chance of success. I'm ready, I affirmed. I will protect my grandpa's legacy. As Mr. Hoffman had predicted, I received notice of a contest to the will 2 weeks later. My parents claimed that I had exerted undue influence over a vulnerable old man. The irony was thick. The same people who tried to manipulate Henry into selling the farm were now pretending to worry about his supposed vulnerability. The legal battle dragged on for almost a year. It was exhausting and expensive, but the meticulously prepared evidence by Henry and his lawyer proved undeniable. Video testimonials showed Henry clear-headed and determined as he explained why he left the farm to me. Neighbors testified about our close relationship and the revival of the farm under our care. The case was finally dismissed when the judge ruled there was no basis for the claims. During that time, Olivia stood by me unwaveringly. Without her strength and determination, it would have been much harder to run the business while dealing with the lawsuit. Amid all the chaos, our relationship grew deeper. One quiet night, after we received the news that the case was officially over, I proposed to Olivia under the oak where we had found our very first truffle. We married the following spring, in a simple ceremony on the farm. Jack Palmer walked his daughter down the improvised path between rows of hazelnut trees that now produced some of the best truffles in the state. Truffle, now a respectable sow and perhaps the best-trained truffle hunter on the West Coast, served as an unlikely bridesmaid, carrying the rings in a small bag tied around her neck. I didn't invite my parents or Madison. Some bonds once broken aren't meant to be mended. Instead, we surrounded ourselves with people who genuinely supported our journey. Neighbors who helped when Henry passed away, chefs who believed in our product from the beginning, and employees who became part of our extended family. The following years brought growth beyond our wildest expectations. We expanded into growing Italian white truffles, a variety notoriously hard to cultivate that we managed to adapt to a specific part of the property. We developed an educational program, inviting aspiring growers for workshops on sustainable farming. We even started exporting to international markets, first to Canada, then to Japan, and eventually Europe. The ultimate irony when French chefs began requesting our Oregon truffles. On our 5th year of operation, we received an offer to buy the business from a large gourmet food company. The price was astronomical, far more than the farm would have been worth if my parents had convinced Henry to sell years ago. Olivia and I didn't even consider the offer. Some things are priceless. Some journeys can't be sold. On a particularly beautiful autumn afternoon, 3 years after our wedding, Olivia and I walked through the oak woods with our 1-year-old son. Benjamin Henry, named in honor of the man who made it all possible, watched the towering trees with wide-eyed wonder as the light danced through the leaves. "Do you think he'll follow in our footsteps?" Olivia asked while adjusting the baby's hat. "I hope he'll find his own path," I replied. But he should always know that no matter what he chooses, he'll have a place here. Truffle, now slower but still dedicated, trotted ahead of us, occasionally stopping to investigate something that caught her attention. Our little group represented everything I never had during my own childhood: unconditional acceptance, genuine support, and the freedom to discover my own worth. Sometimes I think about Madison and wonder if she ever found her own way, or if she's still living under the shadow of our parents' expectations. I heard from a common acquaintance that she works at an investment firm. Exactly what my dad always dreamed of. I don't know if that makes her happy. And honestly, it's no longer my problem. What I learned from this journey is that true success rarely follows the path that others set for you. Sometimes, you have to be kicked out of a place to find where you really belong. Sometimes, what seems like the end is only the start of something extraordinary. The farm my grandpa left, which my parents saw only as an asset to be sold, became the foundation for a life I never imagined possible. Not just financial prosperity, but a sense of purpose, community, and belonging. As we walked back home with the sun setting behind distant mountains and Benjamin asleep on my shoulder, Olivia interlaced her fingers with mine, and I felt a deep gratitude that nearly took my breath away. "What are you thinking?" she asked, noticing my silence. "About how sometimes you have to lose one family to find another. How sometimes the people who should value you can't see your potential, but that doesn't decide your worth." Olivia squeezed my hand. "Henry always saw who you really are." "Yeah," I agreed, looking at our sleeping son and at the land that was now our legacy. And thanks to him, I learned to see that too. The house came into view, cozy and inviting against the orange sky of dusk. It wasn't the mansion Madison probably dreamed of, nor the high-status venture my parents would have appreciated. It was something far more valuable. A place built with integrity, sustained by honest work and real love. In a way, I have to thank my parents for kicking me out that night. Their act of rejection became the catalyst for everything I built thereafter. Maybe one day they'll understand what they lost. Not just a valuable farm or a profitable business, but the chance to know the man I've become and the family we built. But even if they never see it that way, it no longer matters. I found my place in the world, not in Madison's shadow or under my parents' suffocating expectations, but in a life I created on my own terms. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. As we climbed the stairs of the porch, with Truffle trotting faithfully behind us, I thought about how truffles are the perfect symbol for my journey. Something precious that grows in the dark, hidden beneath the surface, easily overlooked by those who don't know where to look. But with the right knowledge, patience, and a reliable guide, you discover that the treasure was there all along, just waiting to be found.